It's a very good morning. This side of the country, live. We are in Uganda, Kampala, East Africa, but it's an afternoon somewhere. It's an evening somewhere. So a very good morning, a very good evening, a very good afternoon, all our dear listeners and viewers. Welcome to yet a special edition of Acfim Talks. Your host today is Felix Kafuma, and we are going to be discussing a very interesting topic that looks at the recommendations that were made by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, commonly known as OECD, on enabling the environment for civil society. And I'll be introducing my panelists in a short while. But before we get started, let me invite everyone out there to grab a cup of coffee and be part of this conversation. We are live on Facebook, live on Twitter, Acfim UG, and also live on YouTube. You can be able to catch and follow the conversations that are going to be happening in a short while. I also want to take the same opportunity to welcome everybody who has been following Acfim Talks. We are now going to be holding monthly talk shows as opposed to the weekly ones, but we shall be having that conversations same time, same place, but on a monthly basis. Before we start, allow me to provide a bit of a context, then I can go and introduce our panelists on why are we discussing a very important topic today that looks at the recommendations on enabling the environment for civil society and that were made by OECD, commonly known as the Organization for Economic Cooperation Development, after having established a work stream on civil society, and that was in 2017. This work stream was intended to provide guidance on development assistance committee members, DAC, on the way they support and engage with civil society. The thinking of the DAC members at that point in time was that no one should be left behind, and the first should be put. That no one should be left behind, and the first should be put last. As a result, the recommendations were drafted and were passed, recognizing that civil society plays a central role in achieving and realizing the OECD-DAC role. Now, many countries, Uganda inclusive, in the last decade, we've been experiencing the closing civic space. Of course, this coincides with the growing authoritarianism as a preferred means of governance, and governments have been seen shifting and labeling vocal organizations, especially to be anti-government, and some looking at them or referring to them as agents of foreign influence. And we've seen also donors, especially withdrawing their support because they have been labeled to be propagating foreign agenda. And because of that, we've further seen the civic space shrinking. And without funding of OECD-DAC members, you know very well that civil society can't play its role of mobilizing the citizenry to participate in the development agenda. On one of the pledges that OECD made, the OECD-DAC donors made, as they were trying to protect and promote civic space by focusing on how they could enable the environment for civil society to function, was to improve on the way they fund civil society actors. And one of the ways they recommended was to ensure that they provide flexible funding mechanism. So in today's episode of Acfim Talks, we would want to expound and also discuss these OECD-DAC recommendations on enabling the environment for civil society, and we track to establish how, to what extent they have been fulfilled, and where we are, and what should be done. And allow me to introduce my panelists, because this conversation, I think we need to bring on board actors, individuals who have been following and tracking these developments to help us make a case and understand where we are and where we stand. And allow me to introduce to you two gentlemen. One is Abel Eseru, who is a lecturer, integrity and civic space scholar, participated in one of the research studies that looked at the state of civic space in Uganda. Abel, I hope you're on set. If you're on set, Abel, you are most welcome to Acfim Talks.
Thanks.
It's great to have you on Acfim Talks, and good morning.
Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to other people who are following us.
All right. I will also be joined by Henry Muguzi, who is a Pan-African civil society leader and a pro-democracy activist, who also weighed in and was part of the team that produced a report that looked at the state of civic space in Uganda. I hope Henry is on set as well.
Yeah, yes, my brother Felix, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are joining us from. It's an honor to be here. It's been such a while, but it's an honor to be discussing such an interesting topic, interesting for Africa.
Great. Indeed, at a point in time when there is a lot of concern, especially when it comes to the closing civic space across Africa. But let's pick it from there. First of all, let me begin with you, Abel. What is OECD-DAC? What is that animal and what does it do? What is its work? Can you break down that structure called OECD-DAC, and why would I even be concerned if I'm a civics space actor or activist?
Okay, let me start first of all with OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which was created way back in 1961 as a unique forum where government, parliament, and civil society work together to address the social, economic, and environmental challenges to globalization. The OECD has about over 68 members who are part of it, who always come together, compare policy experiences, seek answers to common problems, identify good practices, and work to coordinate domestic and international policies. So you find that this is OECD is more of that heart of international cooperation, where better policies are created for better lives. But when you come to the Development Assistance Committee, which we know as DAC, it's more of also a forum which brings together the largest providers of aid. This includes over 30 member countries who provide aid to facilitate and ensure that the social, economic, and environmental challenges are tackled by all actors who are trying to make sure that the world is a better place where people can live and thrive and be able to live a life which is more meaningful than a life that is so which is not good for anyone. So when you talk about the OECD-DAC recommendation on enabling environment for civil society, which was adopted way back in 2021 by the DAC committee members, they realized that there was an issue, especially with civil society. Civil society, they looked at civil society as one of the key actors that is supposed to work together with them to ensure that they are able to contribute towards the Agenda 2030 and also the pledge of leaving no one behind, protecting and defending democracy, and also ensuring that there is inclusive and sustainable development. So these members realize that they need civil society to be part of their agenda and ensure that they are able to contribute towards some of the things I've mentioned. So they developed a recommendation on enabling civil society and other and humanitarian assistance, which focused on three pillars. The first pillar, which they looked at, was respecting, protecting, and promoting civic space. The second pillar was on enabling and supporting civil society. And then the third pillar looked at how they can be able to incentivize civil society and also ensure that civil society itself is inclusive, transparent, and accountable to some of the things they do.
Okay, thank you so much, Abel, for laying the case. Let me come to Henry. Henry, you are a civil society leader, and we are here discussing civic space. Why are OECD-DAC members really concerned about the operating civic space and the environment for civil society? And what is it that they're trying to address in this case?
Thank you, Felix. I think I will pick it up from where Abel left it, because this organization we're talking about, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, is something that not many of our audience in Africa have interacted with, even when it's been around for 60 years. And I was looking at the countries that are listed as members of OECD. I think I saw 38. The most recent country to become a member is Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is number 38th. So I should tell you that there's not one African country that is a member of OECD. Russia is not there, and China is not there. So you'll find there European countries. Surprisingly, Turkey is one of them, but the other usual suspects, of course, United States, Canada are there, Australia are there, and you'll find a number of them from Latin America, including Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, of course. And you'll find there a few Asians, such as Japan, Korea, I think South Korea, no? So that's what we have in OECD. But I have also seen, there's a platform called the OECD Development Center. So OECD Development Center is where countries from Africa participate. And basically, it's a platform for dialogue with developing and emerging economies. But let me go to your question. You asked the question, why is OECD concerned about civic space now? I think it is clear that across the world, democracy is on defense, and that there is a growing descent, an increasing descent towards autocracy and authoritarianism. Now, these members, OECD members, realize and recognize that democracy cannot thrive where there is autocracy. And whenever autocracy has come face to face with the democracy, autocracy seems to be winning the war, especially in Africa and many other developing economies. Now, so this is a situation they cannot accept, because you see, if democracy cannot thrive where it is threatened. And so you cannot talk about democracy if the key elements, such as the key fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of space, such as freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, the respect for the rule of law. These have to be there. And when you look around, these are the building blocks, the fundamental tenets of civic space. And therefore, from 2000, I think early 2000, from 2019, from the year 2000, they've been from 2000, I think, and 1819, they've been concerned with helping out using their clout, but also their experiences on countries that seem to be falling victims of autocracy. And so they understand and made a resolution to respect, to develop and promote civic space, so that citizens can enjoy these countries and be able to express themselves, supporting engaging civil society, but also incentivizing civil society. One of the things they committed to is to provide flexible funding, because when you provide flexible funding, it means that all forms of civil society, including that type of organizing that is informal, can be able to access resources. And without resources, there are things you cannot do. You get to be constrained. But when you support efforts to build civic space, when you support civil society in all its form and shape, regardless of whether some of it is informal, by providing funding, then you are able to help democracy grow. You are able to help democracy, overcome autocracy, and you are able to make citizens believe that they can do something and participate, and you are able to empower those citizens. So this is why they are concerned. And of course, as you know, the international agenda of the sustainable development goals is its success is incumbent upon a number of things, including citizen participation. And I liked what you are introducing when they made a commitment that the last should be put first. Often in their listing of stakeholders, the stakeholder they put last has been civil society. And they are committing here that now the time has come to put civil society first. But they're also saying that we should not leave anybody behind, because just as they say, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, it is now becoming increasingly clear that poverty anywhere is poverty everywhere, and that the world, as we understood with how COVID shook us, you see, a threat can emerge from any state, including those ones having ignored for the longest time, because they're underdeveloped. And so now you see that the mood and the mantra is on ensuring that they rally the citizens from those countries where they've been left behind. Now the challenge is, why are all these things not known to all of us? Especially for some of us that live in Africa, where democracy is on defense, where democracy is in reverse, and where there is a growing descent towards authoritarianism. So the thing is, those are questions I think we need to grapple with, to contend with. But I think the initial idea of ensuring that the last is put first, and that nobody is left behind in this agenda, if the Sustainable Development Goals are going to record anything you can call achievement. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Henry. Indeed, you cannot talk about achieving this SDGs and you do not recognize the role civil society plays, but also within the context of what we call now shrinking civic space. I was reading somewhere as if there were some efforts. I hope it is true what I came across. I think South Africa was one of those countries, could be the first country that might join the 38, probably the only country from Africa so far that seems to have expressed interest. Let's see how that goes. But let me come to you, Abel, on the issue to do, and picking it up from where Henry has left it, because one of the recommendations that he has hinted on, I also talked about it, was the flexible funding that they pledged to extend to civil society actors. But beyond that, I'm so sure that there were other recommendations that were made by the OECD-DAC members in regard to promoting civic space and enabling the environment for civil society. Can you share with the public what are some of those recommendations that were made? You are muted. Okay.
First of all, I want to supplement from what Henry has just said. We know that some of these OECD member countries have now understood that there is work to be done in terms of strengthening civil society so that they can be able to support and engage some of the recommendations, the decisions and documents these OECD-DAC members come up with so that they can be able to implement them effectively. So that's why they say they first looked around and said, what are some of the key things which we need to tackle before we can even improve on how we support some of these actors? What are the challenges and what can we do? So that's why they looked at around and they saw one of the issues shrinking civic space, and also their support to civil society was not so much good. So they developed some of these recommendations and they wanted to see how they can be able to improve. If we look at pillar number 2, which is on supporting and engaging with civil society, one of the things they recommended is that they want to establish, in consultation with civil society, policies and strategies for working with civil societies in both partner and territories of those countries where they implement some of the decisions they have made. But if you look at how civil society, for example, in Uganda is, and how some of these development partners or who sit at the DAC committees where they make some of these decisions, you ask yourself, do they always come down? Do they have like a forum where they all engage with civil society actors to sometimes share what are some of the challenges these civil society actors are facing, and what are some of the policies that they are needed to be brought on board so that they can be able maybe to share in their bigger forums. So we currently don't have, I've not seen so far personally, I've not seen any forum which brings both the local civil society actors in Uganda and some of these OECD-DAC members where they can sit and share notes and ensure that they have sittings and they always engage. So establishing in consultation with civil society some of the things to me would be of good concern and to help improve on how some of these OECD-DAC members support and engage with civil society. Another one was to the second one I saw, which I think is
Abel, you're muted.
I'm saying the second one, which I saw, which was so critical and important, is on they pledge to promote and invest in the leadership of local civil society actors in the partner countries where they operate. In this, they are looking at strengthening in terms of training the leaders, the capacity of these leaders, and also on top of that, they intend on increasing the availability of access of direct, flexible, and predictable support in core program based support. So you look at some of currently what I've seen in Uganda with how civil society and some of these development corporations are working. Most of the funding we have seen is not flexible. The funding they give to some of these civil society actors is fixed in some of the things, so you cannot be able to use the funding for other things whereby, because the context keeps changing and you cannot use funds as you predicted. Maybe initially you looked at the context 2 years back, but for a country like Uganda where context keeps changing almost every month, you need to have flexible funding to be able to confront some of the challenges we face. Because if OECD is a forum where policies are made to in order to confront the socio-economic and environmental challenges, you also need to be aware to the fact that countries differ, and the context in which some of the civil society actors work also differ. Because of the rising authoritarianism, some countries don't even allow civil society actors to organize, to meet. So they need to be alive to that. So for me, the thing of promoting and investing in the leadership of local civil society actors in terms of training and also providing flexible funding is a good area. And also they looked at streamline administrative requirements for civil society support to lower transaction costs for civil society. Let's talk about Uganda again. If you want to apply for funding from some of these development partners, there are a lot of requirements they will require you to submit. Yet, in some cases, the government can map out some of the civil society actors which are so popular and they deny them maybe MOUs and also permits, operational permits. So when a development partner is not awake to some of those challenges, you will say that I cannot give you my funding because you are not legally registered in your country. But you have not taken into consideration under what circumstances have they denied such an organization, maybe an MOU in the districts where the country, the organization is working, or also why has government not renewed the permit of that such an organization. So if we take into consideration some of those things, we are able to understand that, okay, civil society is working in a context which is not friendly. So we need to take into consideration some of the things which are in place and appreciate that how they work should not, how they are working. If you say that they should give it all the requirements as per within the law in the country, sometimes the government uses the law to constrain some of the works of the civil societies. So the OECD-DAC members, with some of these recommendations, I think they are now coming to reality with what is happening in some of the countries.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Abel. Interesting. And we shall be going for a break. But before we go for a break, I think let me first bring in here Henry, picking it up from where Abel has left it, sharing some of the recommendations coming through, but also looking at where we are in terms of are we scoring? Are we not scoring? Probably weighing on that one, but also another question to you. Are these recommendations binding on the interventions or behavior of DAC members when they work with the developing countries in the global south? And also in situations where the DAC members are not fulfilling part of their bargain on their side, how do we hold them accountable to fulfilling these recommendations? Anyway.
Yeah, thank you very much, Felix. This discussion, it's important that many of us in the South understand this, no? Because it's something we never get to know, even pay attention to. Now, I have understood from what our documents have reviewed that at the high level, during those high level meetings, when the DAC members and the development aid committee members, which is DAC, meet, they have invited civil society and they have had kind of discussions. But for us in Africa, it's unclear how somebody a civil society actor gets to be in those spaces. Because at the country level, we don't seem to see the DAC members kind of facilitating such a discussion with the civil society on what is it that they should carry forward in the high-level forum. And therefore, that's an area also to talk about. But also, they restate what they have always been, they have always stated, that civil society plays a very significant role in terms of amplifying the voices of the voiceless. In many African countries, partly because of the low levels of civic competence, we don't have what you can call citizenship. You have a group of individuals, men and women, occupying territories, but their behavior is very different from the behavior of citizens of a particular country. And therefore, a number of things that concern their countries are things that are almost of no concern. You look at their behavior, they don't behave like citizens. The closest it gets to being a citizen is civil society. And of course, civil society then starts to organize in form of organizations as we are. And these development partners, members of OECD, have committed to support these organizations by providing flexible support. And that support may not necessarily be funding, but they need to do many other things. But you see, sometimes you may not know exactly what support we need as civil society actors in countries if you do not speak with us. If you don't come to us and start a discussion so that we can tell you what we need, you cannot stand on top of the tree and use observation to determine what we need, because sometimes it is not what it looks like. And this has not happened. And therefore, these are some of the things that need to be addressed. And I hope this discussion we are having and many others we are going to have are able to awaken and inform the fellow citizens, civil society actors across the continent, maybe across the global south, to understand that the time has come to have discussions with these members of OECD and the Development Aid Committee, DAC. But then you also asked a question, what has to be done? I think it's important to hold a discussion, a frank discussion about how they can help. Because for countries, there are countries in Africa where every time they have overcome a challenge, they have needed external intervention. And therefore, if that has been the case in the past, it might be the case now as well. And therefore, it is important that for that intervention or help or support to be appropriate, they speak to us to tell them what exactly we want to have. But also, when we as civil society organizations on the continent, especially in countries that are descending fast towards authoritarianism, when we get to be labeled as anti-government, as you know, then there is no justification for why a development partner or a member of OECD or DAC should read into that labeling and steer clear and fear to engage with that entity that they have labeled as anti-government. And therefore, I think it's important that these things are discussed frankly in order to have a good outcome. Now, civil society and enabling environment. It's important that even us who are the beneficiaries are able to understand what we need and what we desire and what we think will help us. And so it boils down to a frank discussion, which should happen in all African countries. And I hope colleagues out there that are listening to us can pick interest into these things and have a frank discussion with these development partners who are members of development accounts, the Development Aid Committee, but also the OECD, to make sure that our voices, the voices that get to be represented at the high-level meeting, resonate with what we exactly want to see at a grassroots level. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you so much. Indeed, we must have a frank discussion and a conversation, and this is just one of the many that we are planning for to carry the conversation around the DAC recommendations on enabling civil society environment. But let's go for a break, and when we come back, we shall continue with this conversation shortly after the break.
What do we all share? A hope for a good life, a better life. Imagine a world that provides healthy and fulfilling lives, a decent income and access to knowledge and skills, a clean environment, well-being, and a sense of belonging. The OECD helps build this world. By bringing people together to share their ideas and find solutions that work for everyone. By looking at the challenges we face, from youth unemployment to access to quality education, poverty in old age, and tax evasion. By addressing issues like automation, climate change, or housing that affect our lives. By working as facilitators of international cooperation, we're comparing evidence and information, analyzing problems, and learning from each other. The OECD is where governments, parliaments, and civil society come together to improve the well-being of citizens. The OECD sets standards and good practices and designs better policies for better lives.
You are still watching Acfim Talks. We are today having a special edition that is focusing on the OECD-DAC recommendations on a neighboring environment for civil society. And before we went for a break, we are trying to look at those recommendations and where we are in terms of the members that made commitments to these recommendations that are meant to enable the environment for civil society, whether they are on track, whether they are fulfilling these recommendations that were made, and what is the situation like in Uganda, and what are the gaps. With me, I'm still having my two panelists. I have Abel Eseru, who is an electoral integrity and civic space scholar, also a co-author of a report on the state of civic space in Uganda. But also with me, I have Henry Muguzi, who is a Pan-African civil society leader and a pro-democracy activist. We are still continuing with this conversation. You can join us on our social media platforms. We are live on YouTube, Acfim UG, on Twitter, Acfim UG, also live on Facebook. You can be part of these conversations, and also you can send in your questions, comments, or contributions, and I'll be able to read some of them as they filter through on my screen. Abel, let's look at the recommendations that were made in 2021. Now we're in 2023, and it's until I think last year when even I myself became knowledgeable about these recommendations of OECD-DAC. And the bigger question I asked myself then, which I still ask myself today, and probably I would wish to ask you, why are they not popularized, especially among the Global South, who is supposed to popularize these recommendations? Why is it that civil society has not necessarily picked them up, flagged them, made them an issue, also try to hold the different governments that made these commitments accountable to their word? Why is it that we are in a state where these OECD-DAC recommendations are not necessarily known? Even as we speak now, people are asking themselves, what is this we're talking about?
Felix, first of all, what we need to all understand about these recommendations that when they are adopted by some of the councils at the OECD, they are literally not legally binding. So it is more of yes, I'm a member of maybe member country of the OECD-DAC, but some of the recommendations we have made are not legally binding. So it's a choice of some of those members to either popularize them or sit back. So that's one of the gaps. But when they developed this document in 2021, they had a plan of how to disseminate this recommendation. Uh, First of all, they thought that they would disseminate them through existing meetings and events where they normally engage with other actors, and also through working with civil society and also other think tanks. But we find that, for example, in Africa here, I have not seen, because in their document they are talking of regional dialogues, such as in Latin America, Caribbean DAC dialogues, and Arab DAC dialogues, the global meetings of development corporations policy. But I'm not seeing anywhere where they're talking of maybe Africa. So I was asking myself, okay, is it because Africa is not a member, no African country is a member at the DAC committee? Is that why we don't have like a regional dialogue also where African countries and other civil society actors can meet and they can be able to share with them some of these recommendations they have made as DAC members? So you find that they have their own challenges also internally, because if you're drafting a recommendation on enabling civil society, how civil society works, and you know especially that most of the civil society in the global south are the ones that are always affected because of the rising authoritarianism in most of these countries in the global south. So you need to come up with a formula on how you popularize some of these OECD-DAC recommendations and work within the existing platforms, or you create a platform that brings actors of civil society within the global south. For example, they were calling here regional dialogue, such as Latin American Caribbean DAC dialogue and Arab DAC dialogue. So we needed like African dialogue, even if we only have OECD Development Center, which has African countries. We can have one dialogue platform where we bring on board most of these African countries and they discuss and share some of this information. Because one of the things they recommended here is that they need to always share information with their other actors, for example, within civil society. So if you want to share information on OECD, which you have come up with from the bigger, for let's say the apex, and you want to break it down to the civil society actors, you need to engage most of the civil society actors. You need to bring them on board, share with them this information, and so that they can be able to trickle it to all the other persons they work with. So for me, one of the things which I find as a challenge to the implementation or dissemination of this OECD-DAC recommendation is that they are not legally binding. So that's one of the things. So if it was, because they have 5 categories of the legal instruments they always make, it's only what they call decisions that are legally binding. But anything called recommendation, they're not legally binding.
Okay. So I think that explains why most of these recommendations, many are struggling to implement them because they are not necessarily legally binding, and so there are no penalties or for not enforcing or implementing these recommendations. But Henry, concerning the DAC members, and let me speak to a case in point like Uganda, where we saw some of the members, the DAC members, who were part of the basket fund, the European Basket Fund, DGF, that is the Democratic Governance Facility. When it exited following its suspension, we saw a number of them kind of like participate in the decision to close the facility, which in one way or another are seen civil society struggle, and some have also interpreted this action to be partly contributing to shrinking the space. And I want you to weigh in here, especially looking at how most of these OECD-DAC members respond to the harsh realities of the shrinking civic space in Africa in respect to the recommendations they have made.
You know, the members of the Development Assistance Committee, when they get to be represented in countries where autocracy is predominant, when they get to be confronted and by the crows of autocracy and authoritarianism, you get to be that they also get to be, powerless to defend themselves, and they start, they get to be preoccupied with their own survival, because you see, there are international protocols that bind them, because when you are an ambassador or representative of a member of a country that is a member of the Development Assistance Committee, there are those Paris declarations and the Accra protocols that dictate that you should not interfere with the sovereignty of the country in which we are operating. So if the sitting regime comes out and tells you these members are undermining my sovereignty, or you are overstepping the border, the boundary, I think they find themselves in between a rock and a hard place. So I think it's important for a discussion to ensue about what happens. How do you navigate situations like these? Because, like you have rightly reported, a situation where the biggest European basket fund is suspended and eventually exits the stage, you would want to see the members of the Development Assistance Committee do more. But of course, as we know, they did engage in diplomatic discussions, which almost yielded not enough. Now, so the thing is the time, I think, has come for them to start behaving and acting differently based on the context within which they're operating. They also need to be less risk averse, because there are times in this business or this game where you may have to do a little more, including risking being misconstrued to be overpassing, overlapping, or overstepping your boundary. It's important to understand that civil society in many of these African countries cannot be manifesting in the same way it manifests in their countries. Because, like we said, you may not find what you can call citizens, and therefore, if the organizations that have stepped forward to fill the void of amplifying the voices of citizens get to be targeted, I think you have to act differently. So I think, in a nutshell, in contexts such as these ones that we are seeing in many African countries where autocracy is on the rise, it's important that the members of the Development Assistance Committee come up with extremely creative and flexible mechanisms. But we understand that they are also bound by the principles of accountability from their home countries, because they may not be able to just spend taxpayers' money just like that or they may not want to be seen to be supporting entities that the government has labeled as anti-regime. But I think you can strike a good balance, and that striking of a good balance is what is needed given the circumstances.
All right, thank you so much. You're still watching Acfim Talks, the special edition that is looking at OECD-DAC recommendations on enabling the environment for civil society. My time is fast spent. I have about 2 questions that are remaining that I bring this to a close. Abel, let me bring you on this one. In terms of, first of all, you are familiar with the continuous labeling of CSOs as either voices of opposition or agents of foreign interests. And this narrative seems to discredit their operations. But does this labeling have in any way an effect on the way the donors that majority belong to OECD-DAC relate with the civil society organizations that they support?
Yes, Henry has already initially told you that some of these OECD-DAC members and also the partner countries they are operating in have some legal instruments that they signed up to, and one of them looks at to respect the sovereignty of those countries. So if a country is deliberate on closing civic space, of course it will come up with narratives like labeling the civil society as voices of opposition, foreign agents. That's why you see in countries like, for example, here in Uganda, we saw the biggest basket fund that was funding civil society organizations that work on issues of democracy, human rights, accountability, and constitutionalism. SDGF was closed, suspended, and decided not to renew its to come back because it's so. I think the attack was becoming so much big, and the government was deliberate on some of the things they were doing. So you find the labeling is one of the tactics some of the authoritarian regimes use to close and shrink the civic space, both on the side of the civil society actors, but also to make sure that they close the door for the civil society actors to be able to access funding from some of these DAC members. Because if the regime is preoccupied with the thinking of staying in power and not to match and better the lives of the citizens, it will not care about the human rights, will not care about how democracy should be. It will just care on how can we stay and how can we maintain our stay in power. So whether the OECD members come with some of these recommendations, of course we know they are not legally binding. The regimes in authoritarian, which are authoritarian in nature, will also take advantage of that and say, okay, since some of these recommendations we are aware are not legally binding, we can choose not to enable them have a good environment where they can be able to implement some of the things. So we can decide to close them and say they're interfering with our own civil sovereignty. They are funding civil society who are their agents. So the civil society are misguided. So some of those narratives will start developing, and you see it is always common with regimes that have tyrants in power.
Okay, and quickly, Henry, also on this one, in terms of the fact that, for example, in Africa, most autocratic regimes tend to restrict CSO operations by coming up with all sorts of draconian laws and these lengthy processes. And you find that the members of DAC, who are the development partners or that are supporting CSOs, play into the hands of these restrictive requirements by also demanding that to give you funds, you must comply to ABCD, which have been set by these regimes that are trying to constrict the space. And I understand that those are the challenges, the contextual challenges the OECD-DAC members operate, but how should they now navigate such challenges and still be able to deliver on their mandate? How can they operate in the context, for example, of Africa, where majority of the regimes are autocratic in nature?
Yeah, that's of course a billion-dollar question, because there is no clear-cut solution. Because for all I understand is if the regime has labeled you, first of all, the draconian laws in place are supposed to discourage, vocal organizations, and literally put them on defense. And when you are on defense, you may not be able to do much thinking, and you may not be able, you may not be able to cause much havoc, quote unquote. But I think the Development Assistance Committee members or OECD-DAC members have to be alive to some of these challenges. Now, when the government labels an organization as for example, if a government requires that you must register and then you must go on and have a permit, but you must not stop on the permit. You must have a memorandum of understanding with each and every state or every district, local authority you're working with, and that you must make all these sorts of returns. If the member of OECD wants to support such an organization, it should not be an issue whether the organization has not acquired a memorandum of understanding, because this should be clear that these are maneuvers of autocratic regimes that are meant to preoccupy vocal civil society organizations with the compliance process, that they spend all the time complying, and the only time left is too little to do anything significant. So I think this awareness is what the donors must have, and because civil society is quite an important development actor. In other countries, you can afford to avoid civil society organizations for as long as you had an active citizenry. But in the absence of citizenry, in the absence of citizen agency, you cannot let countries, the men and women in power have a field day. So it's important that this is also clear. This discussion is also clarified in their home governments, because we understand their fear, the fear of being sanctioned, let alone impeached from their home governments on grounds of misusing taxpayers' money and not following the established principles. But I think you cannot, in institutions we are in many African countries, you cannot do without risking some of the things. And it's important that before they are appointed, their appointing authorities are alive and awake to these challenges. Because if you are going to follow the proper channels and want to identify with a civil society organization the way it's been defined by a government that is whose interest is in muzzling and dysfunctionalizing this organization, then they will make everything possible, everything within their power to make sure that this organization does not pass the criteria of those that should be funded. And therefore, situation comes when the development partner has nobody to fund, or they can only fund those organizations that are toothless. And so these are some of the things the members of the Development Assistance Committee and OECD have to know, and these have to be communicated. This context has to be clearly communicated to the appointing authority. But most importantly, there should be a discussion with the affected civil society organizations so that a solution can be reached, and that when they're crafting the interventions, they craft those that are that are appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are coming to a close. Abel, I'm giving you the last word. What are your parting shots on this one?
Thank you so much, Felix. I want to just re-echo one of the recommendations on the pillar one, which are this OECD-DAC recommendation on enabling civil society, how civil society works, which says they need to explore and share strategies among providers and with civil society actors to counter mis and disinformation, harassment, discrimination, and anti-democratic narratives targeting civil society. So I think that's one of the areas they need to focus on, because that is one of the things the anti-democratic governments are using: disinformation and misinformation and harassing civil society. So they need to focus more on that, so that they can be able to ensure that civil society can really have space and an enabling environment to implement some of the decisions they make from their bigger forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Henry, your last word on the matter.
Yeah, the last one is I think we need to exercise some level of resilience as civil society organizations operating in such contexts across the continent, because resilience is what is going to see us through. Because I think our brothers from the developed north always have this saying that there's a cloud, there is a silver lining on every cloud. Every cloud has a silver lining. So I think resilience is what is needed, and these tough times are always expected, and this is where the tough, I think, have to get going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to a close. We're discussing OECD-DAC recommendations on enabling environment for civil society. And with me, I had Henry Muguzi, who is the Pan-African civil society leader and a pro-democracy activist. And also with me, I had Abel Eseru, who is an electoral integrity and civic space scholar. Until next time, your host, Felix Kafuma. We meet again. Bye-bye. Take care. God bless.